Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning into our fantastic February fiction event. I'm Noelle Allen, publisher of Woolsack and Win. It's wonderful to be here tonight, back with our friends, celebrating all these wonderful 4 fabulous works of fiction. I'm going to turn things over to Paul shortly to guide us through the rest of the evening. But first, I'd like to take a moment to thank our funders, including the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council, and Ontario Creates. Without their support, we would not be able to bring out the wonderful books that we do. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the complex and difficult history that has brought us all to this place. Woolsack and Win is based in Hamilton, in an area covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Agreement, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe on how to live peacefully together and to take care of the land that sustains them. It is also covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Most of us do not know or understand the treaties and agreements that allow us to live on these lands, which have long been the home of many Indigenous people. It's our duty to learn of these agreements, to demand that they be honored by our governments, and to take care of the land we now call home. As my many Indigenous friends have reminded me over the years, these land acknowledgements are just the first step on this journey. Now, I'd like to turn things over to Paul Vermeersch, our senior editor. I think most of you know Paul, but for those who don't, let me introduce him. Paul Vermeersch is a poet, multimedia artist, creative writing professor, and literary editor. He is the author of several poetry collections, including The Reinvention of the Human Hand, a finalist for the 2011 Trillium Book Award, and most recently, Shared Universe, New and Selected Poems. He holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Guelph, for which he received the Governor General's Gold Medal. He teaches in the Honors Bachelor of Creative Writing and Publishing at Sheridan and is the founding editor of the Ampersand Review of Writing and Publishing, a literary journal published by Sheridan's Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. And of course, he is the senior editor of Buck Rider Books here at Woolsack and Win. He lives in Toronto. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Noelle, and it's a pleasure to be here, everybody. I'm excited about our fantastic fiction event tonight. We're going to have 4 authors, 4 fiction stylists in conversation, talking about the fantastic works that they create. And up first, we're going to have A.G. Pasquella and Terri Favro in conversation. And by way of introducing them, I'd like to say a few words about each of them. Terri Favro is a Toronto-based novelist, essayist, storyteller, and comic book writer. Many of her stories draw on her background in the Niagara region as the child of Italian-Canadian family that loves science fiction, homemade wine, gadgetry, comic books, hot rods, daredevils, space travel, and dark humor. She's also a longtime freelance marketing and advertising copywriter with 19 awards to her name. I want to say that her novels in the Sister Sputnik series are among my favorite works of spec fiction in the last several years. And it's a pleasure to have Terri here tonight talking with A.G. Pasquella, who most recently is the author of Welcome to the Weird America. But A.G. is the author also of the Jack Palance series, which is a series of hard-boiled crime novels, which include Yard Dog, Carve the Heart, and Season of Smoke. And when he's not writing, he makes music with the bands Miracle Beard and Lasergnu. The latter of those two is also a band that I'm in, and it's a pleasure to have my my creative collaborator here tonight. And so here to be talking about Welcome to the Weird America, please welcome the Weird American, A.G. Pasquella and Terri Favro. I'll disappear now and I'll come back a little bit later. We'll turn it over to A.G. and Terri.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here. Hi, Terri. How are you?
Hey, A.G. How are you?
Doing okay. Hanging in there. Getting better every day. Looking forward to talking about some freaked out fiction.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good description, I think, of Welcome to the Weird America. I was thinking if there was a category, I think you like to label Welcome to the Weird America as sort of weird fiction. I think that was a term you used. I think of it as weird punk. I think that would be, if I had to come up with a name for it, that would kind of be the name, I think.
That fits, yeah. My buddy Corin Raymond came up with, he's a singer-songwriter, and he came up with a great description for the first novella in the book, Why Not a Spider Monkey Jesus, which is about a talking chimpanzee that becomes a televangelist. You know, that age-old story, right?
Yeah.
That's it. Boy meets girl, boy becomes talking chimpanzee televangelist. Same old, same old. But he called it, and I think this is something that you can relate to, because I've been reading, when I was reading your recent book, The Sisters Sputnik, I sort of had the same thought where he called Why Not a Spider Monkey Jesus? He called it science fiction cartoon noir. And I think your book fits very nicely into that category as well. Would you agree with that?
I think both of us are really affected by, oh gosh, so many things. When I was reading, why not a Spider Monkey Jesus, but also NewTown, maybe even especially NewTown, and the this and the that, is that I kept thinking, oh yeah, that's, you know, A.G's influences are really similar to mine. Like, it's a lot of kind of gonzo satirical humor. You know, the fingerprints of the Mad Magazine crew is all over your book.
Definitely.
You know, props to you. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about before we came on was, why not a Spider Monkey Jesus? The best known of them, and by the way, I'm just going to hold this up with apologies to Noel and Paul. This is the collector's edition, the now you can't get your hands on it anymore.
Yeah, that's right, out of print.
I think you referred to this as your punk rock DIY the crap out edition of Why Not a Spider Monkey Jesus.
Yeah, that's right. Originally, it was going to come out from Gutter Press. I wrote that book, and then I sent it to McSweeney's, and McSweeney's published a 30-page excerpt back in issue 11 of McSweeney's, but they didn't publish the book, but they did an excerpt, which was nice. And that, of course, generated some interest. And then Gutter Press, which, as you know, used to be around in Toronto. It was a small press here in the city. And Gutter Press was going to publish it. And I was very excited. It was going to be my first book. But basically, as soon as the ink on the contract it was still wet, but put it that way. And Gutter went under, right?
It was like a cartoon where they just pulled out the contract and still had the pen poised there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You hear the needle skipping off the record, right? And yeah, so they went under. And I thought, well, that sucks, but what can I do now? So I thought, well, you know, technology has gotten to a point, and this was a while ago, obviously, but technology had gotten to a point where you could do print on demand books that looked pretty decent. And I thought, well, with my network in place, maybe I could actually, you know, sell a few of these and get it out there to people who I knew would enjoy it. And as you say, the DIY, the punk ethos, like I knew a lot of musicians. Paul mentioned that I'm in a couple of bands. I wouldn't call myself a musician exactly because I'm not talented. I love making noise though. I love composing songs. I love making sounds. I love seeing how sounds, you know, pile onto each other to make new sounds. So I guess in a way but yeah, in terms of actual musician, no, I just don't have the ability. I wish I did. I've tried many times, but I can't quite get there. So yeah, so I thought, well, I could just do that. I could, the same way that punks put out, you know, like 45s and do EPs and just sell them at gigs and that sort of thing, I'll do that. And so that's what I did. I put it out myself. With a lot of help. Obviously, no one's an island, right? You need editors, you need people to design the cover. That first cover was designed by the cartoonist Michael Kupperman, who is just a genius. And he also did a lot of work for McSweeney. So that's how we kind of connected through that, the McSweeney's connection. And it was great, actually. We met on Twitter. I had not been on Twitter before, really. But a friend of mine who was helping me out with this book said, you need to be on Twitter and meet people on Twitter and kind of get the word out on Twitter. Again, this is all like, I don't even know how long, 20, 10, 15 years ago. And somewhere in there.
I think it was about, was 2008-ish, I think, right? Because it was sort of the aftermath. I think Dundurn Press went under in the aftermath of that, the Great Recession, so-called, right? I think it
Yeah.
was sometime around then.
I'm not sure, but I'll take your word for it. I don't know. Dates,
I don't know.
dates are not my strong suit. In history class, I was always the guy who was like, right around the 1800s, this happened. So yeah, so I put out the book, and my wife at the time was a flight attendant, so I could travel all over the place pretty cheaply. So that's what I did. And I set up all these events like at bars, and hoping people would get liquored up and buy my book. And some of them did, which was
And
great.
it worked. Yeah. I mean, NewTown, basically the same thing, right?
Basically the same thing. Yeah, it had, I couldn't tour with it as much because my first daughter was born sort of right after I finished writing that. I mentioned in the foreword of Welcome to the Weird America how I actually wrote that book on my laptop, sitting in my daughter's room, which was going to be my daughter's room. And every time I was like, oh, I feel like not writing this book anymore, I would look over at the crib and think, oh, things are going to change like soon. I better keep writing. And so I did. I kept writing. And you I know you have kids, but they're grown-ups now, right?
Yeah.
And like, did you have that? Like when you were writing, I know your early books, were you, I'm not quite sure, again, I'm bad with
Yeah.
kids, so.
The guys, I have two sons, and they were probably both teenagers at the point when I was actually writing full-length books.
Oh, okay.
Trying to get them published. So, you know, at that point, you're both less involved in worrying more. But what they had quite but of course, I'd always had them around and written because I'm a freelance writer and copywriter.
Right.
So from even, you know, the time that they were infants, I was sort of, I remember at one point with Joey, like, you know, breastfeeding him at the keyboard and working at the same time, basically. So it wasn't anything new. I think that it was hard to write anything, for me, it was hard to write something that was like a full-length book. Like I was writing a lot of shorter stuff before that until they were a bit older. And I don't know whether that was just because of I don't think it was because they weren't little kids anymore. I think it was more that I just wasn't quite sure whether my particular voice was going to find an audience, because I tended to write a lot of stuff that, I mean, you know, not dissimilar from you, that was a little, you know, heavy on satire, very pop cult infused. I was really interested in the kind of humor that comes out of a lot of golden age cartoons. And in fact, if anything, my guys really contributed to that, because, you know, they were always on Teletoons and watching stuff that I'd never seen and probably wouldn't have watched unless they were there, like Futurama, for example.
Right.
Kind of an impact on my writing. So I think the kids kind of, they kind of contributed to it. And then my husband and I have, we're both, he's an artist, and we both have this great affection for Mad magazine. And we started doing graphic novels together, like really comic book sized ones. Again, probably back in that era that you're talking about, in that nebulous past, and sometime after the turn of the millennium, but then who knows, I think it was probably around 2007 or so. And we started working together on turning some of my stories into comic books.
I think the timing on that is right, because I remember, like, right after that, I remember like tabling at Canzine, and you and Ron, your husband Ron, were also tabling at Canzine with some of your graphic novels. I was there with my DIY books. You were there with your graphic novels, and we were surrounded by kids.
It's true.
The other tablers, the other zinesters.
And I was back at Canzine actually this year at the Toronto Reference Library. We would really, the two of us together, would like to go back and do a table there again sometime. It's kind of it's a nice vibe. And
I love Canzine. Yeah, I love Canzine. I as you know, I was the associate fiction editor for Book and Pencil magazine, which puts on Canzine. Broken Pencil magazine for gosh, how long was it? 4 years, 5 years, something like that. And yeah, great crew, great folks, a lot of fun. And it's one of those things, again, you talk about pop culture and DIY things, DIY culture, and it's great to have a magazine like Broken Pencil, you know, just like in the States where they had Fact Sheet 5 and some of these other ones, some of these other zine magazines, that they're the only sort of mainstream media that are about zines, right? Like without those magazines, people would be making these zines. Well, I guess online now people can put their stuff online, but even then there needs to be like a what am I looking for here? Like a not a clearinghouse, but some sort of filter, right? Some sort of compilation to so you can pick up. And this is one of the things I love about Broken Pencil. You can pick that up and it's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of zines, and they all look fantastic. And I want to read them all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's true. I would say, you know, it is that the online thing really is great, but I don't know, to me, like, sorry, I'm gonna pull out one that we did, this Bella and the Facer Street Gang. That's the guy who's actually based on my grandfather, handcuffed with next to a little girl who is based on me.
Oh wow.
And you know, the thing is, having the physical, for a comic book or a zine, it's the physicality of it is important. Like, you know, like, for example, when we did Pac-N HEAT, you know, this could have worked online, but I mean, somehow having the physical thing was better. I don't know, it's important.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's easier to kind of put it in people's hands and for people to see it and get excited about it. It's an object too, I think, right? Like any book is, but I think when it's a zine or a comic book, it really, you know, that touchy thing is important.
Completely, I agree completely. There's a tactile response that you only get when you're holding an object. And for those of you who might not know, Pac-N HEAT, that thing that is it a zine? Is it a book? It's kind of a combination of both, isn't it? Because it does have a spine. It does have a spine. It's a chapbook with a spine. So Pac-N HEAT was a book that Terri and I edited together. It's what was the subtitle? It's a noir homage to Ms. Pac-Man, I believe, right? Something like that. And it's poems and stories all about Ms. Pac-Man. And it came about because Terri and I were having a conversation on Facebook, and I said something. It was like when you're thinking late at night and you like wake up and you write something down in your journal and you're like, oh, this is a great idea. This is fantastic. And then you look at it in the next morning and you're like, what the hell was I thinking? So that was it. I'd written down, if Ms. Pac-Man were real, what would she smell like? And at the time I was convinced that I was onto something, right? And so the next day we started talking on Facebook. I put that up on Facebook and people were saying, oh, she would smell like cherry, she would smell like marshmallows, which is all makes sense. And then Terri came in. Remember what you said, Terri?
Yeah, I think gunpowder and Chanel No. 5.
Yeah, you said exactly. You said Chanel No. 5 with a base note of
gunpowder, right?
And
so that
like, oh my god!
and it was funny because I think it was during a particularly. So we're drifting away from our main of the prime directive, but it was interesting because it was a polar vortex winter. I think it was right around this time of year. It was like -20 week after week, day after day. Everybody was trapped inside and it was freezing cold, and we put out this call for submissions and said, hey, anybody want to contribute to a zine about Ms. Pac-Man if she were a character in a noir character?
Yeah.
And we
got great responses. It's a great book. It turned out fantastic. And I just have to say, you were the one who came up with that title, Pac-N HEAT, which is perfect. It's so great. I love it. It's one of my favorite titles ever. It's so good. It's one of those ones where I'm like, dang, I wish I had thought of that. But you're right. We are getting sort of off track.
I have a question about your book.
There's
I have a book question.
Yes,
about
yes.
Titles, right? So
Okay, that's a good segue. Yeah.
So there are 3 novellas in here, and of course they all had this other life as an underground, DIY, underground kind of cult favorite. So they were already had their own titles. And I want to just mention one thing about Why Not a Spider Monkey Jesus. When I first saw that title, I, in my head, was thinking that it was why not a spider monkey, Jesus, like you're asking or not. But it's not that. I just want to say to anybody who's thinking that it's a question to Jesus, it's why not a spider monkey Jesus? It's like, why couldn't Jesus be a spider monkey?
Exactly.
Right? So
yeah.
But it's a great title, but how did you come up with Welcome to the Weird America?
Actually, Paul and I came up with that one. We kind of bounced back a few ideas back and forth, like a sort of ping-ponging back and forth between us. Like Paul had come up with the idea of like working the word weird in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And then I thought about Greil Marcus's book about Bob Dylan and the band's basement tapes, which it's called, what is it called now? Something about the Weird America is in that title. And so that's what I wanted to harken back to, is that old Weird America of like hucksters and hobos and carnivals and medicine shows and that sort of thing. Right.
And I'm going to jump in here because you mentioned my name.
Yes.
Right about now is the time we want to get into the Q&A. So for our members of the audience, if you have questions for A.G. and Terri, please hit us up in the chat window. Type your questions in there, and we'll try and get those answered for you. But I'm going to start with a question. I have a question for Terri. A lot of my creative writing students, they're always interested in genesis. They're interested in where ideas come from. They say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what to write. I don't, can I have an extension because I'm having trouble getting the fire going. With these novels, the 2 novels you've written now that focus on the sisters, when was there a moment where you knew that this was the story that was taking shape and you had to tell it, or did it just kind of coagulate kind of organically over time, or was there a eureka moment for you?
Kind of both. I had originally always wanted to write, and I was writing nonfiction about my weird America experience, which is, growing up in a border town. I grew up in what's now part of St. Catharines, close to Niagara Falls, during the part of the Cold War where we were always being told that if the Russians bombed North America, that Niagara Falls would be a first strike target. So as kids, we were constantly being told that we could be vaporized at any second, basically. And every Saturday morning from across the border from Buffalo, we get the test of the emergency broadcast signal during Beanie and Cecil. So it was really underlined that we were all going to die, right? So I kind of grew up expecting that this was going to happen, and then it didn't happen. So I had started writing about that early on, and I had written a piece for a literary magazine in England called The Red Line. I don't even know if it still exists, but they were great. They were an online publication that paid, was fabulous. And and I wrote kind of a creative nonfiction piece for them called, I think it was 10 Snapshots from a Cold War Childhood. And it was basically me describing times during my growing up years when I really thought we were all about to die, when I really thought that the bomb was about to fall. And I won't get into those, although I actually mined those for the books. But they were true. They were true stories. And I was just talking about how I felt that the kind of paranoia and nuclear fear somehow had really worked its way into me. And I figured a lot of other people my age who probably are really messed up, partly for that reason, and I actually don't know it. So it had always been kind of a thing that I was writing about in short pieces. And so I knew that that was what I wanted to write about, because it was such a defining thing for me. But when I started to actually try to turn it into a book, I felt it didn't work, because it was kind of, you end up telling stories about your childhood, and I thought this isn't interesting enough. And I thought, really what I need to be doing is using the grammar of science fiction and comic books, which I really think is like a self-comforting thing for kids of the nuclear age, to tell that story. So basically, that led me to the idea that, well, okay, I expected to be dead in a nuclear attack at some point before I grew up, either that or living on the moon, and neither one of those things happened. But what if there was an alternate reality where that did happen? And that's really what ended up, triggering the book. So there was always this central story that I wanted to tell, and I wanted to tell it in this kind of dark, humorous, kind of cartoony voice, because that's kind of my natural writing voice. But I realized that it would be way more interesting as fiction, because then I could do anything, right?
Right.
I could just, to your point, I could just sort of let it go where it wanted to go. So yeah.
And I relate to that so strongly, because I grew up in Sarnia, and that's another place where children were always telling each other, this is one of the top 10 targets for nuclear annihilation because of all the chemical plants. And I wonder, is that just a common urban legend that children tell each other everywhere? Like they all think they're going to get blown up. And so I want to go back to
no, my Ron group in Montreal were exactly the same age. They didn't have that. They didn't tell that story.
So I want to throw it back to AG, because Welcome to the Weird America and the 3 novellas that are in it, each in their own way, feel the pressure of like sort of mid 20th century Cold War paranoia in a sense. Even if it's not a theme of the story, it feels that they were written with that sort of background radiation. And I'm wondering, AG, if you could perhaps address maybe the ways in which growing up in that America perhaps colored the way that you approach your fiction.
Yeah, sure. I did not grow up in a border town. I did grow up in Dallas, Texas. So that has its own anxieties, definitely. We did do nuclear drills, and we did do tornado drills, because Texas, there's a lot of tornadoes, but it's the same principle, right? You hide under your desk and then get annihilated, right? At some point as a kid, you realize that, wait a minute, hiding under this desk is not going to stop an atomic bomb, right? Hiding under this desk might stop some debris from a tornado, as long as there's not a direct hit. But I definitely remember like looking out windows and seeing like the green clouds turning into funnels and thinking, oh, I hope that doesn't come this way, and that sort of thing. In terms of, like post-war anxieties, like growing up, like when I was a kid, it was the Reagan years. There were still, the Russians were the bad guys. We knew that if there was a nuclear war, that would be it, right? It would be lights out. When I was a kid, you too, Paul, I bet, that movie came out. I'm blanking on it now. What was it? The day after?
The day after tomorrow?
Something. The day after. It was something like that. And it was all about what would happen after a bomb hit, right? And I remember, I didn't watch it. But I remember going to school the next day and everybody was talking about it, right? It was the talk of the playground for sure. And so that was always, that anxiety was always overhead, absolutely. And I remember in art class years later in high school, drawing, doing like this gigantic canvas, and then this tiny, tiny, tiny little bomb, right? Coming near, just falling through this blue sky, and then this tiny, tiny bomb, and trying to get the enormity of that feeling that there was this, the sword hanging over us at all times, right? And I guess that can't, as you say, it's not spelled out clearly in here, but I guess it kind of seeps through, right? Because it is in all the pop culture, and from that era, from when we were kids, and just like you, Terry, and just like you, Paul, I'm very much seeped in that pop culture, and that does come through in the writing.
Well, great. Now, for those of you watching, we can't promise that books are going to protect you from tornadoes or weapons, but we can promise you that they'll make you feel better about it. So welcome to the Weird America by A.G. Pasquella, The Sister Sputnik by Terri Favro. Don't hesitate, get at these books, read them. They are delightful. We're going to say goodbye to A.G. and Terri right now because we have two more writers that we're going to bring in, Emily Saso and Matt Cahill. So they're on deck, and I'm going to say a few words of introduction about them. So I'm going to ask Emily and Matt to get their cameras turned on. And so Emily Saso's debut novel, The Weather Inside, was published in 2016. And her new novel, 9-Line, came out in just this past September. Her voice, dark humor, and style have been compared to Margaret Atwood. She holds her master's degree in political science with a specialization in international relations and security studies, which is a perfect segue from what we were just talking about. And she lives in Toronto, where she works at a union. So welcome, Emily. Matt Cahill is a Toronto writer. His debut novel, the literary thriller The Society of Experience, was released in the fall of 2015 and was picked as a top must-read of the season by Harper's Bazaar magazine. His new novel, Radio Land, was released last fall. His short fiction has appeared in Fusion Fragment, The Quarantine Review, Found Press, and the Rusty Toque, among other places. He has contributed essays to the Best Canadian Essays of 2017, Ryeberg, the Humber Literary Review, Torontoist, and Blog TO. And he's also a registered psychotherapist. So if we're feeling a bit paranoid about nuclear annihilation or international relations, Matt can help us out. He lives downtown Toronto. He lives with his partner and his adorable new kitten on what remains of Queen West. Please welcome Emily Saso and Matt Cahill.
Hello.
Hi, Matt.
Hi. Hey, Emily. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Maybe I could start by, oh, there we go. And I have over here
I
your
see
book
it.
on display. And I actually have AG's there. And I unfortunately don't have Terry's book in my collection yet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can start by asking a question. So as Paul mentioned, you have a master's in poli-sci with a specialization in international relations. Much of 9-Line takes place on a nearly abandoned outpost in a contested part of the South China Sea. And I guess part of me was wondering, has this area been an interest of yours prior to writing 9-Line, or was there a catalyst for you taking an interest in this?
Asia has always been of interest to me, but I had no idea that there were these wild events taking place in the South China Sea until about, I think, 2015 or so, when I read an article in the New York Times that was talking about these coral reefs and atolls that were being turned into islands, essentially, by China and also other countries sort of that had taken interest in that region for various reasons. So that whole thing was just this incredible world that opened wide for me back then. And that's what led me to write this book that, as you said, is very much located in that setting. It's a very bizarre setting. Actually, behind me actually blew up the image that was sort of central to that New York Times article. That is
Oh, wow.
a central setting in the book. It's actually Mischief Reef. It's a satellite photo
Huh.
and of the area, the reef being dredged. So those black things are the dredgers. And then the
Huh.
white is the sort of sand that they're covering the atoll with and turning it into an island. So that's where that came from. I had no prior knowledge of it until about 2015. Yeah.
Wow, and it's so interesting. And first off, when I saw the image behind you, I was like, oh, wow, that's a really interesting abstract painting
Right.
you have there. I was going to ask who the artist was, etc. So it's so interesting how it kind of aligns, and it must have been. I mean, you must have felt like you struck gold when you came across that information about the sort of building of atolls, et cetera, given that it was already something in your wheelhouse to begin with.
Yeah, it was, I don't know if this is, and I want to find out more about how you write books, but for me, they're usually a synthesis of so many different interests and passions and obsessions that I've had in my life and in my head for, decades sometimes. And so this book, it was this just, sparks just flying around, all of these different obsessions and all the stuff that I cared about just coming together in this one, this was the vehicle, basically. This is the thing that it drove the bus, but it was all these parts that came together at once. And I want to ask you, so speaking of settings, so I had the absolute pleasure of rereading Radioland again to prepare for this, which was wonderful. And as you know, I was a huge fan of your first book. But so first of all, I don't even know how to describe this book. And so tell me, what is Radioland about? No spoilers,
No,
Matt. No spoilers.
no, yeah, no. This is pertinent. It's about two people who are trying to find meaning, as well as meaningful connection, in a sort of Toronto boomtown that kind of just doesn't have any room for them. And I think on that sort of level, it's something that you don't necessarily even need to live in a big city like Toronto. I think there's this irony about living in an urban sort of dwelling, and yeah, of course you're surrounded by people, and yet, it's like, how is it that I can't seem to reach out and feel connected to anyone? And then on top of that sort of first description, there's the second layer in that of the two protagonists. One of them is a well-regarded rock musician, and the other one has a kind of weird, powerful sort of magic to make things more complex. And to make things even more complex, there is also a serial killer who is circling around them. So yeah, that's that is if we were on like a 24-floor elevator, that would be my 24-floor elevator pitch.
And you'd have a book in your briefcase that you could sell to me. So that would, yeah. So I want to ask, because see why it was so difficult for me to even describe. So just, we were talking about setting. So I want to ask you a little bit about, the book is set in Toronto primarily. And what was that? You live in Toronto. So what was that? What's it like writing about the city for this type of book? And did it make you think of Toronto any differently?
Yeah, like, so my short fiction aside, which can kind of take place in a more anonymous setting, for me, there's an importance to writing about where I live. I have a close acquaintance with Toronto. I've lived here since '95. I've spent almost 30 years here, in other words. And I've seen a lot of things change, and change is inevitable. I'm kind of, I think it's important to have I think it's important for readers to be able to have a sense of place, and to be able to recognize streets, buildings, neighborhoods that they themselves, either inhabit or can walk past and take notice of. And I think there's an unfortunate trend in Canadian literature where people either want to set their books in the US primarily, or in some sort of anonymized sort of environment, maybe because they feel it will make it easier for them to have international sales, and who knows, maybe that's correct. But I think that it always strikes me as weird is that why is it easier for people to imagine Chicago, even if they've never been there, as opposed to a place like Toronto, right? Like, and I think we need to be a little bit more committed to telling our own stories. And I feel, and you know, unfortunately, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of people out there who are doing this, but I feel a sense of duty about basically talking about what's going on, sociopolitically, et cetera, as well.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I really want to make sure we cover is the darkness in this book, because it's not, I mean, it's, I think it's really interesting the way you write this darkness, because it creeps up on the reader, because the details that you write about are also just so interesting, and you're just sucked up in these people's lives and in the workings of their, you know, of their deepest thoughts. So you get into those details, but there is a real darkness that's at the heart of this book, I would say, and certainly by the end, everything sort of, you know, blows up. So what's it like for you writing in that dark place, and also maybe writing yourself out of that dark place, or taking yourself out of that dark place to go back to your regular non-writing life? You can just talk about that.
It's you have to be able, I guess, to compartmentalize a bit. And I think there are chapters in Radioland that involve seeing things through the eyes, or through the consciousness of the serial killer. And I think there needs to be this balance in place, where this can't just be a monster. This can't just be some sort of Vincent Price twirling his mustache, tying someone to a railway track. And so for me, the challenge was, how do you, because in some respects, the serial killer is just as lost as the protagonists. And there's some conflation around whether the serial killer might be one of them. And so you have someone who is, in their own rather twisted way, suffering, and yet also malevolent, and in such a dysregulated way, causing harm, and knowingly doing so, right? Not doing so by accident. And yeah,
loving it seems,
yes,
enjoying it.
Yes, because I think, at least in terms of that mindset, you kind of have to, right? Like you have to commit yourself to it. Otherwise, you'll probably, you know, become disgusted with yourself. And so it's a bit of a trip. And I think I could certainly switch between the two protagonists, Chris and Jill, without much in terms of getting whiplash when I'm switching gears. But with the serial killer, I kind of needed to set those ones apart when I was writing them, for sure. I have a question for you. So this is your second novel. Do you have a consistent writing approach? In other words, do you have a way that you approach writing a project such as 9-Line, or does it depend project to project because of its themes, or because of what it brings out in you, or what it needs to bring out?
In terms of, say, the actual practicalities of writing the book, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know about you, but I still don't feel like I have figured anything out in terms of if what I'm doing is right. I can say for my first book, it was much more chaotic, the process. because I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know what my voice was for the first book. It took me 10 years to figure that out. So it was much more piecing things together over, a huge, long period of time. For this book, I still didn't start with some sort of outline from start to finish. I knew I had the place, behind me. I had the setting, I had some central characters, I had some themes, I had some things I was passionate about that I knew I wanted to fit into this book. But I think a style of writing that I'm always going to have is that it's a puzzle for me. I have these things, these obsessions, and I have to make them fit together, because I can't sleep at night unless when I have these ideas, I'm like, I have to figure out how to put them together. It obsesses me and I just have to get it done because I know they belong together. So the puzzle is always going to be at the heart of anything that I write. I know that for sure. That's about it. Anything else in terms of how it comes together, whether there's an outline, whether there isn't, that still I don't know. But the puzzle that's going to always be front and center for me.
Yeah, and do you have a routine or a regimen? In other words, do you devote weekends or part of weekdays to writing? How do you? What's your approach to that?
I work full time, like almost every other writer that I've ever met, because nobody
Yep.
can make enough money off of their books. So
Nope.
early mornings, right? Early mornings before work, like 5 a.m. wake up. Now it's easier because I work from home. So that's a huge help. Wake up 5 a.m. and then I would devote, say, half of my weekend, like the weekend morning, to writing. And then that's about it. So I can still have some kind of a regular life. So that's how I do it. What about you?
Yeah, snatches of time, weekends. I'm envious of your discipline in doing the 5 a.m. thing. That sounds like something to aim for, because I can appreciate quite frankly, the quietness of that too, right? Just getting out of bed and hitting the bricks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm mostly weekends, and if I'm writing raw material, definitely weekends only. If I'm revising, and I can kind of like slip into the cracks of the week and sort of like work that in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pop in here. I have some questions about craft. You're talking about process. You're talking about when you make time for writing, but when you do make time for writing, and I'll ask both of you to answer this question in turn. When you do make time for writing, and maybe you're at the beginning of it, what begins to take shape for you first? Is it characterization? Is it the setting, the world, the mood, the colors of things, or is it plot, outline, the events of the story unfolding in order, and you'll shade in the details later? Matt, you first.
I think I'll commit to saying character first, even though it can get a bit messy, because sometimes a great story is a great story, and sometimes part of me will be just get the story down, just get the story down, and yet a story is nothing without characters, right? And the audience, the reader needs someone to cling to, or to provide some sort of consistency. And so as much as I might fall in love with a story or concept, I think you need the character there to kind of anchor it.
And how about you, Emily?
For my first book, it was a particular religion. So I became obsessed with the Jehovah's Witnesses, because there was one of their churches. Oh God, what's it called? One of their buildings across the street from where I lived. So it
Kingdom
was,
Hall.
yeah, Kingdom Hall. Thank you. Boy, it's a long time ago. So it was that. And then for this book, it was a setting. It was learning about the Mischief Reef, as I mentioned, and what was going on out there. But it's all like, that's the thing. But like I said, it's then the synthesis of 10 plus years of obsessing about other things that brings them together. But that was the seed, and that's where I started.
So in a way, for both books, it was the setting, and one was a cultural setting, and one is a physical setting. Fascinating. Are there questions from our attendees? If so, throw them up in the chat window, and we'll try and get them answered for you. And maybe while our attendees are thinking about what they might want to ask, check the Q&A box, I'm being told. Okay. Oh, there it is. There's a couple of questions for AG and Terri that I missed.
If you need to scroll back and involve them in that, that's totally cool with me.
I kind of think we covered it. I just wish that I had I dealt with it more directly. Although we might bring AG back for just a quick answer if he's still around. But before we do, one more question for the both of you. So we've talked a little bit about the process of writing and when you make time for it in your lives, and we talked a little bit about craft and where you start, and for Matt, it's characterization. I mean, to put it very simply, it's characterization, and for Emily, very simply, it's setting and sort of the world and the culture and the physicality of the story. I always say that the work of the writer is everything you do until your book goes to the printing press. And the work of the author is everything that you have to do after your book comes back from the printing press. And these are two very different jobs, and they're both sort of part of the gig. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that sort of the division between the writer and the author. Matt, you first.
Yeah, you kind of think to yourself as a writer, it's like, well, the arrow has left the bow. There's nothing more for me to do. It's out of my control. And yet, of course, you need to, for sake of your own time and effort, and also for sake of your publisher, you want to get out there and represent what you've done. And I think that transition between creator and representative, which I think is kind of how I interpret your framing this, is, or maybe for some writers, a smooth, transition that requires no effort. For me, it can be shifting gears, just because it's just sort of switching the way I'm thinking about it, and also as a newer author, it's kind of like just letting it be out there and being less anxious about just talking about the book for what it is, and not trying to do anything kind of too smooth in terms of trying to get people to like it, right?
And how about you? Excuse me. Go ahead.
I think they're both really, really fun. I enjoy both, but they're also both really uncomfortable. So the writing part is physically uncomfortable. I mean, I have a desk job, and then I sit at a desk all day doing that. And then I also sit at a desk writing my book. So that's uncomfortable. And then, being the author, and like Matt was talking about, self-promo, extremely uncomfortable. So they're both fun and they're both uncomfortable. But obviously I find them more fun than uncomfortable, or I wouldn't be doing it. So, but this should be the reward. And this is the reward. Like sitting here doing this, talking to you guys, this is awesome. This is very fun and not uncomfortable. And
you've got a TikTok thing going as well, Emily. Am I right?
Oh God, no. I don't know what I'm doing. Book talk is it's also fun and uncomfortable. I think that's the theme actually of this. Yeah, for me, book talk is scary. I don't know. Are you going to join? Are you going to join, Matt?
Not anytime soon. Not anytime soon. But I hope you have a great time.
Yeah, no, not having a great time.
You'll have to report back and let us know how frightening it is over there in TikTok world. And I know all my students are totally invested in book talk, and that's their culture, and it's and I'm still, like Terri was saying, I'm still married to print in so many ways. I think we're running out of time, so I'm very sorry. There was an excellent question in the Q&A for AG about switching gears between sort of the weird experimental fiction and writing commercial crime stories in the Jack Palance series. But we'll have to make that perhaps the cornerstone of our next event. And I want to thank all of our fictionistas for joining us tonight, Matt and Emily and Terri and AG. So wonderful to talk about all these fabulous and fabulous stories that are just so entertaining. And so thank you one and all for joining us tonight and being part of this conversation with our authors. I think this is the sort of thing that we should do more of, because getting writers to talk to each other about their process, about their craft, about the writing life is really I think something that readers of all kinds are interested in, and so we'll certainly be doing more of these. You can get Matt's book and AG's book, the Woolsack and Win website. That's woolsackandwin.ca. You can find the bookstore link in the chat window. There's links also in the chat window to Emily's website and to Terri's website, two absolutely fantastic writers, and we want to thank them for joining us tonight as well. Wishing you all a wonderful evening. Happy reading. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you, one and all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.